join me in welcoming to the podium to introduce the final session of the day, Mr. Tom Horvath, Manager, Indigenous Relations with Petronas. Please give it up for Tom.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Horvath, and congratulations for making it to the last panel of the day. I'm honored to be with you today on Tahltan territory. I'm here on behalf of Petronas Canada to introduce our panel's moderator for the next important topic. Petronas Canada is committed to responsibly developing natural gas for a sustainable future. And sustainability means supporting jobs, supporting the environment, and also collaborating very closely with Indigenous governments and communities. Today's discussion on Indigenous success highlights the importance of Indigenous leadership in natural resource development. And I have to acknowledge the very strong leadership of the Treaty 8 First Nations in Northeast British Columbia, where Petronas works and whose territories we impact. At Petronas, we are very thankful and we are very grateful for the relationships that we have. I would now like to introduce our panel's moderator, Stuart McNish. For more than 35 years, Stuart has been involved in video journalism and storytelling. Stuart is the host of Conversations Live, a public affairs dialogue platform carried live on the Vancouver Sun. He is also host of Conversations That Matter, a weekly television show, YouTube channel, podcast, and radio program that can be seen and heard on the Vancouver Sun, Check News, and Bell Media outlets in British Columbia. He is also the founder and president of Oh Boy Productions, that's a cool name, an independent video and television production studio in Vancouver. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Stuart McNish.
Thank you. So welcome to this special edition of Conversations Live here in Prince George. Indigenous success in Northern BC, Indigenous leadership in resource development. So this Conversations Live session is made possible thanks to the special support of the BC Securities Commission, the support and opportunity the BC Natural Resources Forum has provided, along with continued support of our fabulous annual sponsors. This afternoon, we are guests where the two rivers flow together on the traditional lands of the Tahltan, whose people have and continue to call these lands home. We are at the BC Natural Resources Forum in Prince George, and we're also live for this session on the Vancouver Sun as we speak. As we head into 2025, according to the Business Council of BC Senior Vice President and Chief Economist Ken Peacock, the economy of British Columbia has plateaued and the future is uncertain. And he also asks and ponders, where will BC's economic growth come from? As we look to the future, no other sector in BC offers the promise of GDP growth like the resource sector. And key to natural resource development is continued Indigenous success. And I also contend the leadership role First Nations must, and I emphasize the word must play, because without that leadership, I'm not certain what the future will be. We have a fantastic panel today. They are Calvin Carlick of the Tahltan Nation, Nalaine Morin from Skeena Resources, Cody Penner, Nation's Royalty, Chief Crystal Smith, Haisla Nation, and Catherine Pennington from KPMG. Starting on the theme of success, Calvin, I'd like to go to you and ask you, how do we define success from a First Nations perspective here in Northern BC in 2025?
Success is a multifaceted construct. When I think of success in the Tahltan Nation, I usually look up and I think that's Tahltan prosperity. How do we get to that? Cultural revitalization, so revitalizing our language, our cultural practices, that's important to us, or the soul of the nation. Of course, being healthy, being educated, those are other facets of our society that I think are successful. And of course, economic prosperity, which I work for, our nation's Tahltan Nation Development Corporation. You know, having economic success can really push those mandates a lot quicker. Everything has a dollar figure beside it in Canada. If you want to be healthier, there's some money involved. If you want to be more educated, there's some money involved. If you want to have better cultural practices, there's money involved. So for me, it's great to have great businesses, but it's not the only facet to success. I really think a healthy community is where your first point of metric is, right? How healthy are your people? So that's success to me, is if you have happy people, that's better than having a lot of money.
Chief Smith, I was in your territory last year, and when I saw the transformation that's happened over the last 4 or 5 years since I was last there, and the continuing changes, how do you define success?
I think for a majority of the Indigenous leaders here up on stage and in the room with us, we're all very well aware of the poverty that exists in our community and the massive gap that is in between our Indigenous members and the rest of Canadians. I think in terms of what prosperity means is closing that gap in each of our individual communities and having our culture and our languages thrive. I think that defines a lot of the success. Without the culture and the language in all of our communities, the identity isn't there, that strength isn't there. We have to rebuild that aspect in our communities, and then the rest will follow.
You talk about closing that gap. You remind me of a conversation that I had with Perry Bellegarde when he was the National Chief of the Assembly First Nations. And he said, you know, and this was at the time, he said, Canada is number 5 on the index of quality of living in Canada until you go to First Nations land. 61st. 61st. And he said, it's closing that gap. So how important is it that we start to bring in the kind of economic opportunities that allow us to close that gap? And it requires individual effort and First Nations leadership to develop some of those companies. Nalaine, from your perspective, how important is it that these opportunities now exist and then can move those benefits into the community as a whole?
I think it's extremely important that we continue to move in the direction that we are. And, you know, just in this conference alone, thinking back on the leadership presentation we heard earlier, the demonstration of the assertion of nations, and more specifically nations leaders, in advancing our positions in potential economic development opportunities only continues to increase. But in thinking about, you know, all the comments that I've heard from my colleagues here up on stage, you know, all of this work, this hard work, supports and leads us in that direction towards self-determination, right? We often hear about, you know, nations, and more specifically First Nations people, talking about our lands because they're our lands. We often talk about lands and protecting and stewarding our lands, thinking about future generations because that's who we are and that's how we're taught. And now with the new skill set we've got, and we are continuing to gain, we're only gaining ground.
Cody, we had a brief conversation before coming on stage about success. What's your definition of success?
That was a good question. I actually had a really good coach back in the day, Morin Johnstone. She's a Tahltan member, and we did this funny thing. It was like it was a circle of happiness. And there was different blots on it, like education, relationships, right? Whether it's with friends, family, others, other aspects, health, all these different pieces. So I kind of look at it in that sense, and I'm just kind of riffing off Calvin. I mean, he put it in good terms in the Tahltan sense, but a big part to me is the relationships, right? So do you have healthy families? I had a really good chat with Ken and Zertz, my cousin, about how we've structured our own family to stick together through business and other things like that actually keeps us connected. So just keeping healthy relationships, healthy communities, things of that nature. I think Calvin did a fantastic job of success. But one thing I do look at is time, being able to free your time, right? So I look at money as something like that. I mean, in an Indigenous sense, I guess if you can collect wealth, then you can spend your time where you would like to a degree, rather than grinding to get that wealth, is one way I look at it. So, I mean, success, once again, I think Calvin did a fantastic job of describing it, but I do look at money as being able to free time so you can spend it in those places that you really, really care about.
Well, and you can't have that money if you don't have access to economic opportunity. How important, Catherine, is access to economic opportunity?
Well, I think that it stands to reason that in order to achieve those metrics of success, be it health outcomes, children's and family development, social development, the access to capital is the most crucial part. And, you know, I was listening today, as many of you, to Chief Willie Sellers talk about exactly that, right? Which was when you set the foundation for the economic development, that then paves the way to those social determinants of health. So access is crucial, but so is removing the barriers to that access.
What are those barriers that you can, I know there's many of them, but what are a couple that you can highlight right now?
As much work that has been done and continues to be done around access to capital, I don't think we have to look very far to see the exclusionary systems, systemic racism, probably being the most significant, which has then created no access to capital for generations. So the access to capital comes at a really crucial point, and I think there's some, incredible examples of that here.
Cody?
Yeah, just one example. So I'm Vice President of Corporate Development for a company named Nations Royalty, and we're 77% owned by the Nisga'a Nation. And I think we're the first and largest majority Indigenous-owned public company, so it's taken until 2024 for a large majority Indigenous-owned public company to come to fruition, and that's a great example of that. Like, there's been public companies for a long, long time. People have made a lot of money. Look at the largest companies in the world, right? They're public. They get access to risk capital that helps them build projects from the ground up, right? Debt's great. Private equity is fantastic. But you want that risk capital to build a project, a resource project from the ground up. This is the first kind of step into it for Indigenous folks. So it's a great example. It's taken this long for this to happen. So we're the first, but we certainly hope we're not the last, right? With access to capital like this, you can get money from Europe, the States, wherever it may be, to build the projects on your territory, right? So we're hoping that we'll see some Indigenous-owned public companies building mines, oil and gas, forestry, what have you. But exactly on that, it's taken until now for that to come to fruition.
And I just want to add, it's 2025, and I know that Charlene Gale is here, and of course we've mentioned Nilo Edwards and other champions who have fought tirelessly for a federal loan guarantee program in 2024, then now 2025. So incredible work has occurred because of leadership and champions on this stage and in this room and in this province and in this country. But I don't think we can forget that those programs are just getting rolled out. So just to Cody's point.
Nalaine, Skeena Resources, access to capital, how fundamentally important has this been?
Well, in 2024, we were actually able to successfully secure partnership to fully finance the project. So it's extremely important.
Congratulations.
And, puts us in an excellent position to move forward and advance the project. Right? At this point in time, our biggest hurdle, of course, is always to acquire the permits necessary to move forward to construction.
Calvin, access to capital. And then I'm going to come back to capital, okay? Yeah.
No, I'm on a few boards where we give out capital, and I could see how crucial that is. But I think I tied back to my experience with First Nations success, and then the foundation of our success starts with economy and owning things, right? And you can't own things if you can't have access to money. And often, I like to look at it as Indigenous people are finally progressing. We're finally building credit. We're finally having assets to leverage so we could take on a company and say, we own that. Now we can take the risk and reward and grow our economy faster. Even with Tahltan, like the one thing I love, is true to my heart, is seeing our people get hired, trained, promoted, earn more. The families are happier. So those are some things I like that we build, but we control all of that if we own the entity. And you can't own the entity without access to capital. So it's a critical issue for First Nations ownership.
Connie, I'm going to go to Crystal first, okay, and then come to you. Crystal, when we take a look at Cedar LNG, access to capital, what were the challenges that you faced as you started to move forward on this incredibly ambitious project? Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Actually, I remember last year at this event, I was saying I was hoping that I was back up here on stage saying that we announced a positive final investment decision, which happened in June of 2024. Definitely exciting times, but I mean, we overcame a lot of hurdles in terms of being able to get to that success, and access to capital was definitely one that was a massive hurdle. The loan guarantee programs that, you know, I spend a lot of time going back to Ottawa to advocate for and tell different levels of government how much that was needed for Indigenous success in the province. But not only Indigenous success, our success is the province and Canadian success. So, you know, unfortunately, those programs didn't come to fruition in time. The access to capital, we went through First Nations Finance Authority, which was definitely, you know, the makeup of those types of access is a lot of risk to our community. And you think about the companies that, you know, that have that easy access to capital, you know, there is a risk to it. However, our risk is a little bit different when it comes to my shareholders are individuals in our community. Right now, we've got 2,000 Haisla members, but we've got future generations coming. So in terms of that was a lot of involvement from our community to be able to even have the go-ahead to move forward with that. We took an extensive community referendum process in order to be successful, which I found very, again, you know, a lot of sleepless nights going into that. However, the feedback that we received back from our community was absolutely positively overwhelming in the fact that they understood, they understand that making the decision of yes for us to be able to borrow that money was the next evolution of our history in this province, in this country, in terms of that self-determination.
It was a complicated process, wasn't it? First, so explain to us so that maybe other nations can learn from your example. How did you manage to work within the community to explain what the challenges were, what the risks were, what the potential upsides were, and get to an agreement where you could then move to the next step? In all other community engagement sessions, we would bring along all of the experts that had to do with whatever particular topic. Our community, fortunately, we engaged as much as we possibly could in terms of any LNG facility that was being proposed for the territory. So the educational piece is essentially the foundation of further success around engagement pieces. This one, we took a particularly different avenue. And we felt it was important that the experts responding to community concerns were our own people. So on that extent, it was myself and another fellow council member who's been on council for many years, and our CAO in front of our membership.
answering to their concerns. We made ourselves available for the entire time that the voting could take place. Anytime we put out our phone numbers, if they had any concern or any question. We were very fortunate to have in the rooms previous leaders that understood that this next step that had that respect of our community members for sitting at the council table for 10, 15 years, to be able to speak on our behalf, to say this is the next step our community needs to take, vote yes.
You had to run an information campaign.
Sorry?
You had to run an information campaign.
Yes.
Not misinformation, information. Cody.
Yeah, just one more thing on the access to capital. It's been very hard getting capital in the mining space the past little while here, a few years. And when you see that happen, you see that risk capital dry up, you really just see the best in class assets getting and companies getting capital, right? So I just give a little shout out. Used to work for Skeena, so I'll give you the shout out. You guys were able to pull down that capital in a very capital constrained environment, right? And it's because you guys have done such an amazing job on the Indigenous front, on the environmental front, right? You got the Skeena mentorship program, giving land back towards the provincial park in Mount Haisla, like all these positive things that Skeena's been doing over the years. When you're starting to see where to deploy capital and you're starting to, look at the projects that are best in class, and it's got a nice asset, but it's got a wonderful management team, you start to see these projects get capital. Right? So if you have Indigenous inclusion from the beginning, when you're an investor looking for, you don't want to put your capital into a risky environment, as you've seen in the past couple of years. The best-in-class companies are getting it, Skeena being one of them, and you're seeing some other projects that are up that alley as well, right? And the other ones simply are not getting funded like they should be per se, but they're just not getting that capital.
Calvin, you look like you want to jump in there.
It's still on access to capital.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great thing. So TNDC, we're at the level a lot of communities aren't at. Like, I feel like we're at level 2 now. We finally gathered our capital. We finally have the business expertise in house. Really, now it's just dreaming. It's just dreaming. Like, where do we want to take our nation? Where do we want to increase our balance sheet with equity? Equity is the most important thing you can do these days. Is plant that seed and grow those assets so they can sustainably give back to your community for years and years. So for us, we're like, what if we want to own big infrastructure projects, which the Tahltan Nation does? Capital's so huge, and being great at capital helps. As Cody knows, Cody's kind of an expert these days. I'll give you an example. We have the Runner River project. It's called Mount McClymont Volcano, but it's a Runner River project that came through our territory in 2013. We negotiated, I'm not going to take any credit for this, I'm just telling the story, but we negotiated a 60-year purchase deal with BC Hydro. That existed with AltaGas for a while, and then when they sold it, Rob McPhee, who's our master negotiator, says, hey, wait, this transaction's almost going to go through. He's like, how can we get involved in this? And anyhow, we negotiated a good transaction there. We used the capital we got off that transaction to leverage government bonds, I believe, and we bought 10% of a $1 billion project. And it'll slowly pay itself back. But like I said, we're planting the seed now. Give it some time, kind of like how Norway does it. We like to have a trust fund that pays for our country. So access to capital is huge, and knowing what kind of capital is out there is even better to know. And that's one example of how we leverage bonds with some cash.
Nalaine?
I just wanted to take the opportunity to pick up on Cody's comments, not specifically the point regarding capital, but all of the other elements that we factor into making decisions before we actually get capital, right? And I think that's one of the things many First Nations today are developing tools and understanding, advancing knowledge on, right? Things like exerting our own governance, right? Making sure that some of the rules of the land include our own traditional laws. things like developing capacity in areas of environmental stewardship, right? And today, we're seeing a number of First Nations, advancing in professional positions. I typically don't give a shout out to myself, but I will. You guys gave me a mic. Right?
Well deserved, well deserved.
Positions like myself, now with Skeena Gold and Silver, hold a position of VP Environment and Regulatory Affairs. And in this role, we're taking advantage of the opportunity to ensure that there is a Tahltan voice in the decision making, right? And it's clearly represented in our environmental assessment applications, in our permit applications, and the work that we are doing in partnership with the Tahltan central government's technical team, right? Through these opportunities as Indigenous peoples, we are doing what we can to ensure that our voice starts to become part of the decision making. So while, yes, I do understand, you can't buy anything without capital, there are a lot of other pieces that we need to take into consideration. First Nations are advancing, that become part of the equation. Thank you.
So how do we move from we must ensure that our voice be there to we are the leading voice? Catherine?
Oh, I think this is a good question for Crystal. I really do.
Oh, come on. Okay, Chris.
Well, then I will tell your story.
You just got a handoff there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I honestly do. I mean, the question is, how do we ensure that Indigenous people are at the forefront of projects and of natural resource projects for the future? I think that clearly there's been, I started working in energy over 20 years ago. And at the time, I worked in Aboriginal relations. And then the primary focus at that time was inclusion in the supply chain. And that was sort of nouveau. And then we moved from inclusion in the supply chain to what about more Indigenous people employed, Indigenous people in positions of opportunity for development into leadership, which still is terribly underrepresented, but certainly was at the time something that was of interest. We moved down the continuum now into a DRIPA era. DRIPA changes the legislation, that changes the requirement of industry, and now the new emergence is Indigenous peoples, Indigenous nations on the forefront of projects. And I think that evolution is vital and is critical, and I know from working in the resource sector that when we look at how do we co-create the future, it does have to be done in this province from an Indigenous lens. And has to be Indigenous people at the forefront. Actually, how that occurs comes, I think, on the leadership of others who have done it first.
Crystal.
She answered it very amazingly. Again, it's that opportunity and where you see the key aspects of that opportunity. We talk about leadership, but I wouldn't be sitting up here without the mandate from my people. Without their approval, their mandates, those opportunities don't become realistic. So there could be many opportunities that sit around us and that are available, but it's ultimately we have to take our people along with us on that journey. So I think that's a lot of the key focus on in the beginning is setting that foundation with your membership. When you take the opportunities, we were very fortunate of our geographical location in terms of that export opportunity. Our membership have had the opportunity to explore many different, such as potash, oil, refineries. They've all been proposed for our territory. But one thing that was acceptable was the LNG industry, and that's where we focused on and spent a lot of our time bringing our people along with us. We had 3 or 4 LNG facilities that were proposed for our territory at one time, and we learned a lot in walking that journey with those companies around different technologies, different impacts. And And it was essentially this opportunity that was provided by our negotiations with LNG Canada and Coastal GasLink, where we found the opportunity to be a majority owner in one of our facilities. And that happened in 2015. So it was nearly 10 years of a journey for us to take our people along with us on Cedar.
So as we take a look at the political landscape in British Columbia right now, we have a government in place that has a supply and confidence agreement with the Green Party. Green Party is on record as saying they are opposed to LNG. How is it even possible to imagine LNG development or even moving forward in so many of the critical mining sectors if the projects are not Indigenous-led? Nalaine, can I start with you? Because I think that what you're doing, the success that you're realizing, is because of the leadership. And how important will this be moving forward when we take a look at the overall economy of BC and what mining can bring to it?
Yeah, when you talk about like the Indigenous component, and we've heard this throughout this conference and heard it for years, and it's only becoming more so. Without that level of Indigenous participation and involvement, I absolutely agree, you're not building a project. I think if you were looking to try to advance something, I think the amount of work that you would have to do in engagement and you know, your efforts towards building relationships would only have to be, you know, that much more. That establishment of trust really changes once you start to work in a much more collaborative, much more, you know, work towards partnership. And that's the only direction you can go in today.
Cody, do you think that provincial and federal governments are actually listening? I know that Catherine made reference to DRIPA and these principles have been adopted, but are they being realized? And until we get to that point, are we really going to be able to see the role, the full leadership role that Indigenous-led organizations and First Nations communities can bring to the equation?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to take a little bit back to kind of riff off Nalaine. So we work in the royalty space, right? So impact benefit agreements have payments connected to them. They're essentially royalties, right? And you're starting to see some precedent-setting ones across Canada, right? So you're seeing some really nice top-line net smelter return royalties going to some of these Indigenous groups. Some key ones I can point out is in Nunavut. So the Inuit have negotiated NSRs on the mines up there with Agnico and on Back River, so they have a 1% NSR on Back River and a 1.4 on Meliadine. Anyways, mining space. Basically what I'm getting at is those are kind of precedent setting, right? And then I talk with other groups across Canada, Nations Royalty. We actually help groups negotiate these benefit agreements, payments. And you're seeing some really poorly structured deals, right? And especially ones that are kind of from the past, right? And a miner's going to do the best they can to not open that permit back up for consultation because it might encumber them for continued operations if it's a big brownfield. And you're seeing there's no alignment with the Indigenous group and the company, right? So these agreements are progressing over a 10, 15-year period, and the Indigenous group is getting screwed over a little bit for what they should have had, right? And then you're starting to get into 2024, 2025 when you have amazing projects like Skeena and LNG and all these things and awesome NSRs coming along. So there's kind of a standard getting there, right? So, and going on the inclusion front, right? In the royalty space, you get a nice NSR. That's a huge chunk of value for an Indigenous group that working with a nation's royalty or something somewhere else, you can monetize and actually get, you know, capital up front before these projects go forward, right? But if you're not making good agreements, then you're not seeing those benefits materialize. And to your point, if you're not acting in good faith and being open and transparent, and if you have asymmetry of information in the negotiation process, and you're trying to pull one over on them, on the Indigenous group from the industry, this just isn't going to work, right? So we see that in the royalty space. Obviously, I could dive into equity, all the other pieces, but particularly, I'm seeing a lot of poorly structured deals, and if we just acted in good faith from the beginning, we'd have a lot happier stakeholders and rights holders.
Nalaine?
I just wanted to follow up on that piece, but also further explore the whole notion of decision making, right? So while we're looking at, all of the work that needs to be done to gain capital for projects, there's also a really important core piece of that, which is the decision making. Now, in the province of BC today, we actually have 2 consent-based decision-making processes, agreements in Tahltan territory, one for the Eskay Creek project and one for Red Chris. And these are the first ones in the province of BC and the first in Canada, right? That work was done. There was certainly support by Skeena Gold and Silver for that support to see that Section 7 agreement move ahead, and continues to this day as we work through that process. But it was BC and Tahltan coming together as governments to say, we want the Tahltan central government to make a decision on this project, right? And I think that in itself, in and amongst everything else we're speaking to here, also speaks to Indigenous success in this world, right? In this work.
Calvin?
Oh, thank you. Let's make this a talk show. I'm going to say some uncomfortable things. Just kidding.
Trying to read the Hoover.
I like that Indigenous led because I'm Indigenous and I like when we're winning, of course. But I often think about that phrase. I'm like, I think it's being Indigenous inclusive because Canada is still part of that equation. Canada has to say yes to these projects as well. It takes me back to the foundation of Canada. Often in coffee shops throughout the Northwest, you'll hear people talking about, basically, why the hell do we yield to First Nations so much? Why? I thought we're all Canadians, and I always tell people, embrace discomfort. This is a tough conversation. But if you go back to 1763, the King of England and his royal proclamation, it's a big, long document. He throws it down. The big scrolls. All my agents, please read this. But what it says, no matter how you read it, left to right, up and down, overall it says coexist. We will coexist with the Indigenous peoples of Canada. We're not going to conquer them because we tried, but we couldn't. Conquest was, shut down. And they finally said, yeah, we're going to coexist with the Indigenous people of Canada. And that's why today, this very moment, there's a lot of Indigenous conversations that go on when it comes to industry. But I like to be mutually beneficial. I like to see my non-Indigenous friends have prosperity as well, right? So when we at TNDC, we do work, there's a lot of non-Indigenous people who benefit as well because we hire everyone, we subcontract everyone. We not only uplift our people, but we uplift our whole community. So yeah, the Royal Proclamation is why the Indigenous conversation is aplenty in 2025.
Well, the way in which British Columbia shut down treaty negotiations after it joined the Confederation, thinking, oh, well, we don't need to do this anymore, and the mess that it's left. But now we are moving our way through this process, and I think that we have greater understanding on how we start to work towards opportunities to work together. And as you pointed out earlier, when one person benefits, the community benefits. When the community benefits, the region benefits. When the region benefits, so does the province, and on through to the country.
Yeah, it's a value, right? Like, we're very communal as Indigenous people. We don't like just ourselves benefiting. We like to see everyone prosper.
I'm going to quote my one little bit about Aristotle. The failure of one person to realize their full potential is a loss not only to that person, but to all of society. And I think that what we're seeing more and more of now, and it's something that I really kind of cherish in the time that I'm alive and get to experience, is that we're watching First Nations communities throughout British Columbia and hopefully across Canada, where more and more people can realize their potential. I just have to share one little story about a young man a couple of years ago at the Pennington band. I was interviewing him about an apprentice program that he went through. I didn't think he was even going to talk to me, but we go outside, put a camera on him, and he lit up. And I said, was this program of value? And he said, yes. I said, well, what was the thing that, and he was learning to become a heavy-duty mechanic. And he said, I said, what was the greatest value that you got out of that? And he said, well, self-confidence. And I went, well, what's so important about self-confidence? And he said, well, it's like wildfire. You have no idea where it will take you. Isn't that a remarkable quote? But, I mean, in essence, that's what we're talking about, ground up through to leadership and being able to show a way in British Columbia and hopefully other regions on how we can do this. But there's still challenges. You know, we talk about access to capital, but there's also scope challenges. There's so many opportunities. Like in talking to Michael Goring from the Mining Institute, he said, you know, we've got 17 projects that are on the horizon right now that are just awaiting final approval. That's 300,000 person years. It's $23 billion in worker wages. But there's the scope of it all. How do we manage that? And with First Nations taking leadership roles, it puts a tremendous amount of weight on individual First Nations in being able to manage all the elements, you know, when we were talking about stewardship and so on. Catherine, like, how do we help the, you know, the great representatives that we have here on stage, but also other First Nations in being able to navigate their way through the challenges that scope presents?
There was a comment earlier today about how, you know, I work as a consultant now, but it isn't always about going to get external help and consultancy. Sometimes it's about asking the questions from your neighbors, from other successful projects and communities, asking for that help. The point here about being communal is also in the knowledge sharing. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity to reach across the country and to look for those wins and those successes. And I think that Indigenous people, by nature, are going to share that information with other Indigenous organizations and groups. I'm really struck by that premise of that young person feeling confidence, and I just can't help but also think about that, which is that I fundamentally believe that you cannot be what you cannot see. And if you have never seen Indigenous people in your own community with good paying jobs, with economic opportunities, with degrees or diplomas or certifications, then you're not going to be that. So showing that is so important. And I was a social worker for many years, and I can tell you that I've done much better social work in industry and working in natural resources than I ever did as a social worker. Not to say that that's not crucial, important work, because it is, but for me, this is an opportunity to influence upstream change. And I know that, you know, Crystal has some good stories about that as well. We share that interest around how young people have an opportunity to see themselves differently through natural resource development, because it's so impactful in a community. As a social worker, there were sometimes communities that I worked with where there was 2 or 3 or 4 generations of unemployment. What chance do you have if you've never been involved in a system that has employment and economic development?
Cody.
Yeah, I like that thought of being able to see it happen. On another shameless Nations royalty plug, but yeah, we're the first majority Indigenous-owned public company, and once again, certainly hope we're not the last. There's a really good example in the north. Selkirk First Nation just bought the Minto mine out of receivership, which is super cool, and we're gonna help them progress that one. And there's another Indigenous group that bought Flying Nickel out in Manitoba. So you're starting to see these groups purchasing these assets, right? And I mean, hopefully we're a bit of an example of the access to capital and what you can see that can be done, right? Just simply by going out and doing it. Our first goal is shareholder return, right? Nishko owns 77% of it. We're hoping other Indigenous groups become equity partners and be part of the journey as well. But the second is capacity building, right? So we're hoping to pump out, Indigenous board of directors, executives, things like that, and then other public companies pop up and do the exact same thing, and you're starting to see that playing field change in the public space and in the corporate space in general, right?
Nalaine?
I wanted to pick up on your point. You can't be what you can't see, and I 100% agree. And always look for and make time to take advantage of opportunities to share knowledge. And I'm fortunate, to work for Skeena Gold and Silver. 2 years ago, they created a mentorship program for young Tahltans that are up-and-coming professionals. We actually have 2 young Tahltans, Ashley and Caden, that, will achieve their professional engineering status this year. And they did their training through the work that takes our project from the exploration phase through to design and development, right? So, I'm quite proud of that fact, and, quite honored just to be able to be a part of their journey and to share some of that knowledge. And I'd certainly encourage everyone, if you've got that opportunity to share, to guide, to provide some insight on things that you've learned, let's take advantage of that.
So on that theme of what you can see, what you can envision, many years ago in front of the Washington Monument, American civil rights leader Martin Luther King gave this magnificent address, "I have a dream." It was his vision of what the future would look like. What do you dream of the future a decade out, especially when it comes from the perspective of First Nations leadership in resource development, in community development in British Columbia? Crystal, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to work my way back down and close with you, Calvin.
Wow, in 10 years, that there's more ownership of Indigenous major projects in this province and across the country. I think this panel provides a great example of what success can be accomplished in terms of setting those dreams and vision and lay the foundation of today for the next the next generation to come in. In terms of my community, I want to see more of that professional development. They have all the opportunity in the world. I'm in a very great position right now to finally see the changes. Had this been 5 years ago, I was talking about the hope that LNG Canada and Coastal GasLink would bring to our community, and the changes that would happen, and what we visioned that our people would be accomplishing. 10 years out, I see fluent Haisla speakers. I've got 2 grandsons that Xavier's 7, Luca's 2. I want them to be able to speak our language to me. As for the broader context, Indigenous ownership together in major project development is something that I have a passion for. We think about the value chain currently within the LNG industry and how it differs depending on the region and where your community lies along that project. The ownership piece would be absolutely amazing to see being accomplished in 10 years. Unfortunately, I'm seeing it improve, having the relationship and have that building between our communities. But to be in a major project together, helping one another navigate the social aspects of our community would be absolutely amazing to see. I don't know if my friend Roland Wilson is here in the room. but I had an opportunity to have a conversation with him around some of my thoughts about that opportunity, and he told me, "You're crazy." And I said, "Well, with that attitude, it won't happen." Roland, I'm sorry for bringing that up, but that optimism, we can do it. Indigenous communities, we can do it together. So let's work together, take those barriers down between our communities, and find success in one another.
To borrow a line from Barack Obama, yes, we can.
Yes.
Nalaine, what's your dream 10 years out?
I think my dream goes, I don't think we're quite there for 10 years, but my dream is to see First Nations governments continue to mature, continue to evolve, and assert our self-determination. I would like to see at some point in the future a Tahltan Minister of Mines. That's one of my dreams.
Good. Cody? Because I know you dream big.
That's a great question. I like that question. Yeah, I mean, when you go to Alaska and you go to some of the major cities, like some of the largest buildings have Native corporations on them, right? Being on the finance side and the pubco side, like I'd like to see Indigenous people be financial powerhouses in the space, right? Like Nations Royalty in itself. Not their shameless plug, sorry, but I would like to see it be a multi-billion-dollar company that provides Indigenous shareholders long-term stable dividends that they can bolster their trusts with and go to the bank and put money or borrow money to do economic development initiatives, social plans, whatever it may be, right? That's just the one company. We hope to see many, many more. So just having that wealth to, for your time to do things that matter, such as healing our communities, protecting our wildlife, our environment, building strong relationships amongst each other. So 10 years from now, I want to see, Indigenous folks in the public space competing with all the other companies in the mining industry, forestry, everything.
Catherine?
I can't help but think about success and dreams in the context of social health. And so I think about natural resource projects that then create economy and community, which then means that own source revenue can be funded to classrooms, can be funded to hospitals, can be funded to education. And then we're going to start to see suicide rates drop. We're going to start to see our kids complete high school. We're going to start to have sovereign, independent control of child welfare. We are going to have a wealth when we have those things. And that to me is success.
Calvin?
10 years, I'd like to see the Canucks win the cup.
Good luck.
I know that's not realistic, but you got to dream big. Just kidding. Well, 10 years, of course, I like to see my community succeed. Tahltan prosperity, however it's defined. I like seeing individuals be happy. But it all starts, I'll go with Crystal's answer, with ownership. By magnitude, if you own more, there's more spin-off of net returns. There's more things you can own. Those things that you own, then you control them. You can control people who work for you, which is your own people. You can control how much you train them, how much you invest in them. So I would go with ownership because I would say it's the foundation to First Nations prosperity in modern day. We can get more cultural practices. We can revitalize our language quicker. All those things cost money. But in the end, I was like, so one thing is ownership. TNDC about 10 years ago, if we had made the same exercise, it was 10 to 15 million on the balance sheet. We thought we were smoking it, right? Whoa. And I was on the board back then, but when I left the board, we were about 70 million. So 10 years from then till now, 2014 till now, we crossed the line of like 109 million on the balance sheet and other ventures. So in 10 years, I'd like to be realistic and think we will cross that $1 billion mark with our assets because we are very good at reinvesting. And the final piece, sorry, this goes out to everyone out there who's a business leader, a community leader, who has influence like myself. I believe I have some influence. every so often look behind you and try to pick up a younger person and uplift them, mentor them. Allow them to get into the mix of things. So that's my other thing. It's my call to action to everyone out there. Don't forget the people behind you who are aspiring to be successful.
Well, I want to believe that we can achieve all of these things. And I'm just going to close with a remark from Sir Frederick Banting, who was one of the co-discoverers of insulin, going back a little over 100 years ago at a time when people were dying from diabetes. And he said, "It is not within the power of the properly constructed human mind to be satisfied. If this were the case, all progress would cease." I am of the theory that you can do or be anything you want within reason, so long as you're willing to work long enough, hard enough, and make the sacrifices. And the talent on this stage demonstrates that we can do what we set out to achieve. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you very much to all of you in the audience. And because this is such an important topic for me and for what we're doing at Conversations Live, we're having another panel on this topic in Vancouver on January 28th in the evening. You can tune in on the Vancouver Sun as we revisit this topic in other ways in which Indigenous leadership is transforming our province and our country. Thank you.